Welcome to Journey Through Time, a place where curiosity sits beside you and the quiet echoes of our forgotten past stretch beyond the horizon. Tonight's journey begins under skies that have been watching over this planet long before we built our first cities, marked our first calendars, or wrote our first histories. These same skies once looked down on people whose names we may never know, yet whose lives shaped the world we inhabit today. It's not a mystery hidden in shadows or locked away in secret archives. It's a subtler mystery, one that stands in plain sight, etched into landscapes, myths, and stones, waiting patiently for us to notice. Across the surface of our world lie traces, some carved into rock, some preserved in ancient maps, and some wrapped in stories so old that their original tellers have been forgotten. Tonight, we're going to follow these whispers and wonder aloud. What if an entire civilization once lived, thrived, and even shaped our world, and we've forgotten it ever existed? Before we begin, picture where you are right now. Maybe you're sitting somewhere quiet with a drink, unwinding after a long day. Perhaps the sky outside your window is dark and scattered with stars, or maybe daylight hides those stars as they wait for night. Thousands of years ago, someone else may have looked at the same patch of sky, using it to decide when to plant crops or when to embark on a journey. Those same constellations might have guided the builders of monuments we still walk past today, unaware of why they were built in the first place. If you find joy in questions that drift slowly and don't demand an immediate answer, you're in the right place. Let's step together into a wider, older story, one layered beneath the history we think we know. When most people imagine history, they picture it as a straight line, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Events placed in sequence like beads on a string, neat and orderly, each leading into the next. But history is rarely that simple. A more fitting picture is a layered one, a canvas of time with known cultures on the surface and older, dimmer traces beneath. The top layer carries the names we recognize: empires, inventions, migrations, and monuments. Yet beneath that surface could be civilizations we have only begun to glimpse, ones whose knowledge quietly seeped into the hands of later peoples until its origins were forgotten. We see hints of this in places where the physical evidence refuses to fit our neat timelines. Foundations built from stones, larger and more perfectly fitted than anything the visible structure above would require. Lower levels of temples cut with precision, while the upper levels look rougher and newer. Cities whose oldest layers are also their most advanced. Archaeologists often explain this by saying, later, builders reused older stones. And if that's true, it means someone else was there first, long before we had names for them. This phenomenon appears across the world. From the Andes to the Mediterranean, from Asia to the Pacific, walls and terraces hint at knowledge deeper than we can trace. Large, irregular blocks at the base, smaller stones above, perfect interlocking masonry beneath, cruder work laid on top. No mortar, yet seams so tight a blade cannot slip between. Everywhere it happens, the same question hangs in the air. Who built the first part? Before written language, knowledge survived only by telling. Each retelling reshaped the story, smoothing some edges, exaggerating others. Without records, 3 or 4 generations could pass, and a real event would shift from fact to legend, from legend to myth, until its human core disappeared beneath storytelling. Archaeology can only work with what survives, and survival is uneven. Stone endures, wood dissolves, clay tablets remain, bark scrolls rot away. A civilization built mostly of timber or reed in a wet climate could vanish almost entirely. A people who wrote on cloth or skin might lose their entire written memory to fire or time. The result is a puzzle with missing pieces, a lost city here, an inexplicable object there, and gaps where whole chapters of human experience once unfolded. Sometimes what remains doesn't match the story we think we know. An object too advanced for its supposed era. A building technique appearing thousands of years before it should. A map showing places that didn't exist yet. When that happens, scholars have choices. They can fit the anomaly into the known framework, argue for an error in dating, or set it aside as unexplained. But every artifact, every layer of stone, every odd alignment has an origin. And in some cases, that origin might belong to people we do not yet recognize. If such a hidden civilization ever existed, it may not have resembled the sprawling empires we imagine. It might have been a loose network of communities, scattered across continents, but linked by shared skills, seafaring routes, or sacred knowledge, rather than political borders. Instead of conquering territory, they could have specialized in navigation, farming innovations, astronomy, or tool-making, passing their discoveries to others, who then adapted them as their own. Influence doesn't need to wear a name tag to endure. You might use a tool every day without knowing who invented it. Multiply that across thousands of years, and it's easy to see how an entire culture's fingerprints could be everywhere, yet invisible. Consider how fragile our own record really is. Without constant maintenance, roads crack and bridges fall. Buildings left empty for a few decades begin to collapse. Given a few centuries of neglect, even our strongest monuments would erode into rubble. Imagine a civilization tens of thousands of years ago that built mainly from wood, clay, or other materials, quick to decay. Even if they mastered shipbuilding or mapped the stars, almost nothing physical would survive today, except for stones or accidental burials. And if a later people stumbled upon their abandoned cities, they might reuse the materials without ever knowing who first shaped them. Large swaths of earth remain unexplored in detail. Dense forests hide ruins from satellites. Deserts bury entire cities beneath shifting dunes. Vast stretches of ocean floor are still uncharted. Even in familiar landscapes, droughts or construction projects occasionally reveal ancient walls just below the surface. Each time that happens, we're reminded how little we've uncovered and how much might still lie unseen. A carved stone can be dismissed as a natural oddity, an unusual artifact filed away in a museum storeroom, a weathered mound mistaken for a hill. Yet any of these could be a surviving fragment of a story far older than we imagine. When we think about progress, we tend to picture a steady climb, but history shows us knowledge can be lost. Skills disappear when they're no longer passed down. Entire technologies vanish in just a few generations. If there was once a high point long ago followed by decline, later societies could have rebuilt fragments of that knowledge without realizing it was a rebuild at all. That possibility changes how we see our surroundings. A farming practice in one corner of the world could have roots in a place far away. A tradition we assume began locally could be the echo of an ancient exchange. Even the way a road curves or a calendar counts its days might have been shaped by hands long forgotten. Patterns whisper to us. A symbol carved into stone in one country, almost identical to one thousands of kilometers away. A woodworking joint or metalworking method appearing on opposite sides of an ocean. A myth told to children in two unrelated languages with the same underlying structure. Of course, independent invention happens. Human beings often arrive at similar solutions when faced with similar problems. But sometimes the parallels are too precise to dismiss. When they line up with uncanny accuracy across cultures supposedly isolated from one another, it suggests someone made the connection long before we realized it existed. To understand why these echoes matter, think about how much of Earth's surface has yet to be studied closely. Huge areas of the seafloor are blank spots on our maps. Thick jungles conceal stone terraces and temples that satellites can barely detect. Deserts shift, swallowing entire cities beneath meters of sand. Even our own backyards can surprise us. A drought can reveal ancient building outlines in a dry lakebed, or construction can unearth forgotten walls just below the pavement. Each new find reminds us we're still at the beginning of discovering our own past. It's entirely possible we've walked over or sailed past remnants of such a civilization without recognizing them. Without the right context, a carved stone becomes just a rock. An unusual artifact is mislabeled, a pattern of mounds mistaken for hills. The scale of what survives depends on how people lived. Nomadic groups leave different traces than urban centers. A society that valued biodegradable materials could leave almost nothing but memories. This is where the idea becomes more than speculation. It's a challenge to our assumptions about progress. We like to imagine human knowledge as a steady upward climb, but the truth is cyclical. Skills fade when no one preserves them. Entire branches of expertise vanish within a few generations. If there was once a golden age of knowledge before our recorded civilizations, later societies might have rebuilt fragments of that lost world without knowing it. That possibility changes how you see ordinary things. The curve of an old road, the alignment of a forgotten temple, the planting cycles of a crop, all could be silent witnesses to decisions made millennia before written records. Influence doesn't need signatures to persist. We already live among countless anonymous inventions, words, tools, rituals, and designs whose origins are obscured. Multiply that anonymity across 10,000 years, and an entire civilization could vanish from memory, while its influence becomes everyday habit. Another clue lies in our shared myths and oral traditions. Before writing, stories were the primary way knowledge endured. But stories mutate, details slip, names vanish, events grow more dramatic to hold attention. Over millennia, factual accounts can become legends, and legends transform into myths. Yet buried inside those myths can be practical knowledge. A seemingly magical hero might be a distorted memory of a skilled navigator. A city raised overnight could be an engineering feat retold as a miracle. The heroes and gods may be exaggerations, but the agricultural calendar hidden in the story's structure may still be accurate. This is why researchers sift myths for practical threads. When the same unusual details appear in stories oceans apart, it's harder to dismiss them as coincidence. Consider flood myths. Nearly every culture has one. Details vary. Divine punishment, natural disaster, one family saved, a whole world drowned. But the core idea persists. A great inundation changed everything. Some of these align with known geological events at the end of the last ice age. Others may hint at coastal civilizations now underwater. Similarly, myths of lost lands like Atlantis, Lemuria, or Kumari Kandam might be distorted memories of real places. Even if exaggerated, their persistence suggests something about vanished landscapes resonated across cultures. Or think about myths of visitors, culture bringers who arrive from elsewhere and teach agriculture, astronomy, or laws before disappearing. In one tradition, they're gods. In another, wise strangers. But the pattern repeats. Perhaps these are memories of actual encounters with travelers carrying advanced knowledge. oral tradition can be astonishingly durable. Australian Aboriginal stories describe coastlines as they were 7,000 years ago. This shows it's possible for factual content to survive across immense spans of time, hidden inside narrative. Physical clues also appear in maps and mapping traditions. We think of maps as modern tools, but fragments of ancient cartography sometimes show coastlines or islands not discovered until thousands of years later. Even coastlines drawn as they were before sea levels rose. Some ancient maps appear to be compilations of older sources, raising the question of who first gathered that geographic knowledge. Indigenous navigational charts, like Polynesian stick maps, record vast stretches of ocean using currents, waves, and star positions. Such knowledge had to be learned and passed down carefully over generations. If begun earlier than we think, it could have mapped enormous areas long before outsiders arrived. Maps carved into stone, etched into clay, or woven into myth hint that people once traveled farther and observed more closely than our timelines allow. A map can outlive its maker if it's copied enough times. Over centuries, details may be added or altered, but the underlying framework remains. Even structures themselves can act as maps. Stones arranged to mirror constellations or to outline a region's shape suggest a deep understanding of both geography and symbolism. If a now-lost civilization was skilled at navigation and mapping, its data could have filtered into younger cultures as inherited knowledge. Yet maps are fragile. Unless carved in stone, they're easily destroyed. For every ancient chart we've found, countless others probably decayed. Still, fragments survive in surprising places, hidden in manuscripts, encoded in rituals, or buried in myths describing distant islands. When multiple cultures far apart describe the same remote place with matching details, it suggests they're drawing from a shared but older source of information. Architecture gives us another window into this mystery. Across the world, the oldest parts of structures often show the highest precision. Foundations cut from massive stones, seams so tight you cannot slip a blade between them, while later additions are rougher. Some sites feature blocks, weighing hundreds of tons, moved with apparent ease, drilled holes far deeper and more uniform than the known tools of that era could produce, and layouts aligned with astronomical events at extraordinary accuracy. We see corbelled arches, complex drainage, and advanced urban planning appearing suddenly with no clear predecessors, then disappearing again. Why would a culture abandon superior techniques? Sometimes the answer is simple: resource depletion, social collapse, invasion. But sometimes it points to lost knowledge. Perhaps the builders inherited techniques from an earlier group they absorbed or replaced. Perhaps they found an abandoned site and built atop it, reusing its stones without understanding the original methods. In such cases, the original identity of the builders vanishes, leaving only puzzling traces. Patterns repeat across oceans. Polygonal masonry in the Andes resembles stonework in the Mediterranean. Similar city grids appear in regions supposedly unconnected. Alignments to solstices and cardinal directions show up worldwide. While independent invention is always possible, repeated coincidences in complex techniques stretch that explanation. If a forgotten civilization once specialized in these skills, its fingerprints might still be visible in the foundations we think we understand. Technology, tools, and materials also tell a story. We classify eras by their dominant materials: stone, bronze, iron. Yet sometimes we find artifacts that don't fit the sequence. A finely crafted bronze object in a site predating bronze. A mechanism with gear-like components where no such machinery should exist. These out-of-place artifacts challenge neat timelines. Some can be explained by misdating or contamination, but others stubbornly resist easy answers. Perhaps they were trade items from far away, perhaps heirlooms passed down, or perhaps remnants of a more advanced tradition now lost. Even our genes carry whispers of the unknown. Modern genetic studies reveal ghost populations, groups that must have existed because their DNA lingers in ours, yet leave no archaeological trace. These traces show up as unexpected links between distant peoples, migrations we hadn't recorded, or adaptations that spread long before our known history would allow. If a seafaring or widely traveling culture once existed, its legacy might live not in ruins, but in our bloodlines, scattered like embers across the world. All of these clues, myths, maps, architecture, tools, genes, may be fragments of a larger story. None alone proves the existence of an unknown civilization, but together they form a constellation of possibilities. Each point of light suggests a pattern, and as more are found, the shape becomes harder to dismiss. Perhaps the next discovery won't be a massive ruin, but a small, ordinary object that forces us to redraw the past. Perhaps we're already holding pieces of the puzzle without realizing it. When we think about the archaeological record, it's tempting to picture a neatly organized archive. Rows of labeled boxes, each artifact in its place, each event accounted for. In reality, it's more like a jumbled attic full of fragments. Most of the pieces are missing. Some are worn down beyond recognition. Others sit in the wrong layers, displaced by floods, earthquakes, or human digging. The story we tell about the past is stitched together from whatever survives. That means shadows, blank areas where we know something must have happened, but no evidence remains, gaps where timelines falter, contradictions where one find disputes another. Patterns hide in these shadows. Some are geographic, vast regions barely explored because of political barriers, conflict, or sheer inaccessibility. Rainforests still cloak entire complexes. Deserts hide cities under sand. Mountain valleys may contain untouched settlements. Others are chronological, stretches of time when evidence thins without explanation, suggesting either loss or absence of material culture. And then there are anomalies, objects out of place, technology too early, building styles that appear without precedent. Each anomaly might be a mistake, but together, they start to look like a whisper of something more. Even when evidence survives, it can be misread. An ancient quarry can resemble a natural cliff. Earthworks might be dismissed as hills. Stones toppled by earthquakes may appear as random scatterings rather than the outline of a vanished building. Without context, even advanced objects can be catalogued as curiosities rather than breakthroughs. That's why the idea of an unknown civilization remains plausible. Not as fantasy, but as an open question about how much of human history we've actually uncovered. What's more, archaeology isn't done in a vacuum. It's shaped by funding, technology, and politics. Some areas receive intensive study, others are left for later. Some finds make headlines, others gather dust. This uneven attention creates blind spots. In those underexplored spaces, both geographic and chronological, might lie the remains of people we've never named, who influenced the cultures we already know. Every time a new technology like ground-penetrating radar or LiDAR reveals hidden structures, it feels like the world reminding us how much still waits unseen. We also have to accept how fragile even our solid evidence really is. Fire, flood, rising seas, earthquakes, all can erase centuries of work in a single day. Civilizations can vanish beneath oceans or deserts, their ruins preserved just enough to hint, but not enough to tell the full story. This isn't speculation. It's already happened to known cultures. Extending the same logic to cultures we haven't yet found is not a leap, but a continuation of what we already know. The past is far bigger than the slice we've uncovered. If we accept that possibility, that some innovations we credit to known civilizations were inherited from earlier, forgotten ones, the shape of history changes. What we see as a first might really be a rebirth. A farming method, a navigation trick, a calendar, a tool. Each could have roots in hands long forgotten. Knowledge travels invisibly. Traders, migrants, or refugees can carry it across mountains and oceans without leaving monuments behind. Within a few generations, its origin is erased. People assume it has always been there. This matters because knowledge does not always advance in a straight line. It can plateau or regress. A society can lose techniques when specialists die or resources run out. Think of how many skills even modern people have forgotten in a single lifetime. Handcrafts, old technologies, oral languages. Now stretch that across millennia. We may be standing on the remnants of entire chains of innovation whose links snapped ages ago. That doesn't just challenge our sense of progress. It humbles it. It suggests our story is one of repeated rises and falls, with peaks of knowledge followed by collapses and rebuilds. Patterns like this ripple through myth as well. Culture bringers, lost lands, catastrophic floods, star alignments. These stories may be the genealogy of human memory, passed down as narrative instead of DNA. And like DNA, they mutate slowly, but retain a core pattern. When the same pattern appears in places far apart, it's worth asking whether they're descendants of the same ancestral memory. In that sense, myths are maps, not of geography, but of knowledge. They can point to where something valuable once existed, even if the thing itself is gone. The stones themselves speak in a quiet language. Even without inscriptions, they reveal choices. The way blocks are shaped and fitted, the orientation of structures to the sky, the sourcing of materials from distant quarries. Tool marks show whether a builder used stone or metal implements. The type of stone tells where it came from, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away. Perfectly level surfaces or tightly fitted joints without mortar reveal advanced planning and precision. Massive blocks moved into place hint at methods of transport and lifting that defy our assumptions about ancient technology. Some sites show the most advanced work at the lowest levels. Foundations of enormous blocks precisely cut, overlaid by smaller, rougher stones from a later era. Temples built atop platforms whose builders remain unknown. Isolated blocks with machine-like polish, lying far from any known quarry. Markings that match no known script, but reappear across continents. Alignments to solstices, equinoxes, and constellations, achieved with breathtaking accuracy. Each of these alone could be dismissed as a curiosity. Together, they suggest continuity, a tradition of knowledge traveling across time and space, even if the people behind it remain unnamed. We also see evidence of reuse. Later cultures often dismantled older sites to harvest building material, unintentionally preserving and erasing at once. A later temple may stand where an older structure once did, its stones cut from the same sacred platform, but rearranged. This mingling makes decoding the past even harder. It's like trying to read a sentence written with letters from several different alphabets. But it also preserves hints of the original builders, embedded like fossils in the newer construction. Even erosion patterns can be clues. Weathering beyond expected age, tool marks inconsistent with known technologies, or stones placed in ways later cultures wouldn't have attempted. When you look at these anomalies across regions, massive polygonal masonry, similar city layouts, astronomical alignments, a picture emerges. Not proof, but a suggestion of a shared source. Perhaps not a single empire, but a network. Perhaps not even simultaneous, but recurrent. Cultures rising and falling, inheriting techniques, moving knowledge like a long relay race through time. Each handoff erasing the name of the previous runner, but preserving the baton. Tools are among the clearest markers of technological progress. We divide human history into ages by the materials we use to make them: stone, bronze, iron. But every so often an object surfaces that breaks the pattern. A finely wrought bronze item in a layer predating known bronze production. A precisely drilled stone core from an era when only hand chisels should have existed. These are the so-called out-of-place artifacts. Many turn out to have ordinary explanations: later intrusion into older soil, misdated layers, or mistaken identification. Yet some remain stubbornly hard to explain. They hint at forgotten techniques, at the possibility of knowledge circulating beyond our timelines. Sometimes these anomalies are small: a single tool, bead, or shard of pottery in an unexpected place. But sometimes they're whole sections of wall, or mechanisms with moving parts, where no such engineering should have been known. They may represent trade items from distant lands, heirlooms passed down for generations, or the scattered remains of a culture more advanced than we realize. Even when we solve the puzzle, the process forces us to redraw timelines. Each confirmed anomaly shows us how easy it is for human achievement to outstrip our assumptions about it. We also have to consider the possibility of reuse and adaptation. Imagine a village stumbling upon the ruins of a once advanced settlement. They take its stones, metals, or tools and integrate them into their own lives, not understanding the original purpose. Over time, the origin is forgotten, yet the artifacts persist. Thousands of years later, archaeologists uncover them and wonder how such sophistication appeared early. The answer may not be that the later culture invented it, but that they inherited fragments from someone before them. In this sense, every out-of-place object is both a mystery and a breadcrumb, a small, durable clue to a bigger story waiting just outside the edges of our accepted history. The genetic record provides another dimension to this search. Unlike stone or metal, DNA carries the past inside living people. Modern genetic studies have revealed ghost populations, groups that must have existed because their DNA is present in ours, yet leave no archaeological trace. These hidden ancestors show up as unexpected links between distant peoples, or as traits that arose earlier than our migration models allow. They may represent small, isolated communities that merged into larger cultures, or seafaring groups who left children behind in faraway lands. In either case, their existence is a reminder that human history is richer than our physical evidence alone. We know this because of how quickly genetic science has overturned assumptions. For decades, we believed humans and Neanderthals had almost no contact. Then DNA proved we carry their genes. A single finger bone and a few teeth revealed an entirely new branch of our family tree, the Denisovans, known first through genetics rather than fossils. If something similar happened with a now-lost civilization, one that traveled, traded, or mixed with others, its genetic signature could still linger in modern populations, even if its cities and artifacts are gone. This possibility reshapes how we imagine contact. A seafaring culture could have crossed oceans long before the official dates of first contact, leaving subtle biological footprints. Distinctive adaptations, like tolerance for certain foods or survival at high altitudes, could spread between populations faster than migration alone would allow. In some cases, the genetic link appears first, guiding archaeologists to re-examine sites or time periods they thought they understood. In this way, DNA functions like a living map of human movement and connection, one that can preserve the memory of people whose names, languages, and monuments have vanished. Sometimes a single discovery shifts everything, not because it is grand, but because it refuses to fit anywhere. A tool of unexpected sophistication found in an early layer, a structure far older than the culture built on top of it, a myth verified by geology. Each one is a reminder that our current narrative of the past is provisional, stitched from fragments, always subject to change. When enough anomalies cluster, they form a pattern, not yet proof, but an outline suggesting a larger picture. Architectural leaps are particularly striking. We see sudden appearances of advanced techniques, perfect stone cutting, seismic-resistant foundations, mathematically precise city grids, then a retreat to simpler methods. Why would knowledge vanish? Sometimes disasters scatter specialists. Sometimes traditions break. Sometimes an entire people moves on. But the effect is the same. A sharp rise followed by a decline, as though a torch had been passed and then dropped. When we find the remnants of such moments, we're left wondering whether we're seeing the birth of innovation or the last echo of something older. What's fascinating is that these patterns also mirror how knowledge spreads today. Ideas rarely move in a straight line. They leapfrog across boundaries, flare up, then fade. A technology invented in one place may be perfected in another and forgotten in a third. Multiply that across millennia, and it's easy to imagine a web of ancient knowledge spanning oceans, leaving isolated islands of evidence in its wake. Each isolated artifact or ruin could be a surviving node of that vanished network, its lines to the others erased by time. This perspective also changes how we look at myths of origins. We tend to think of history as a ladder of progress, but myths often describe cycles, golden ages, catastrophes, rebirths. These cycles may reflect real rises and falls of cultures. A city swallowed by the sea, a flood that reset the landscape, a wandering teacher who disappeared. Each could be a poetic retelling of an actual event or person. Even astronomy hides these memories. Some myths encode eclipses, comet passages, or star alignments that can be dated thousands of years back. When the date predates the culture that recorded it, it suggests the story is older than the people telling it. Language itself may carry faint imprints of forgotten contacts. A word in one tongue unexpectedly matches a word with similar meaning thousands of kilometers away. Known trade routes explain some overlaps, but others defy easy tracing. If a widely traveling culture spread ideas and objects, it could also have seeded fragments of its language in distant lands. Over time, those fragments become local words no one suspects are ancient immigrants. Even rituals may serve as time capsules. Alignments of temples, recurring festivals, or specific construction traditions can encode knowledge long after its origin is forgotten. An annual ceremony might preserve an ancient astronomical observation. A temple built to face a certain star might preserve a migration date. Each surviving detail is like a breadcrumb, hinting at a path through the dark forest of deep history. As we push further into the idea of hidden histories, another question emerges. How much of our present world still carries the fingerprints of those who came before? Agriculture, navigation, urban planning, astronomy, metallurgy, all could have roots extending far deeper than we assume. Each artifact, myth, or genetic echo is like a window into a forgotten chapter. When examined together, they suggest not a straight line of progress, but a web of knowledge passed from hand to hand, across generations, continents, and oceans. Think of how ideas migrate today. A technique invented in one part of the world spreads quietly until it appears everywhere, detached from its origin. Multiply that process across thousands of years, and it's easy to imagine how advanced methods might have been dispersed long before written history. Over time, the people who first developed them vanish from memory, but their influence remains embedded in practices, materials, and traditions we consider ordinary. Even our sense of time and measurement could carry ancient inheritance. The way we divide the sky into constellations, the rhythm of calendars, the geometry behind our buildings, all may echo lessons taught by hands long forgotten. Each fragment is not just evidence, but an invitation to look deeper, to compare across cultures, to question what we think we know. In this way, searching for a lost civilization is not only about recovering the past, but about sharpening our perception of the present. This line of thinking also reframes how we view technology itself. We usually see it as a ladder, simple tools first, complex machines later. But the evidence hints at something more like tides. Knowledge can surge forward and then recede, leaving behind only a few isolated traces. A lost technique might survive in one village as a ritual or a superstition. A fragment of an old map might linger in a sailor's chart, centuries after its source vanished. A forgotten astronomical cycle might still guide planting seasons in a rural community, without anyone realizing how ancient it is. The deeper we look, the more we find examples of knowledge that appears too early. Builders cutting and moving blocks of stone heavier than modern cranes can lift. Navigators crossing open ocean with accuracy rivaling GPS. Metallurgists working with alloys we assumed were impossible for their era. Some of these feats have mundane explanations once we understand the context. Others remain stubborn outliers, hinting at a level of skill or organization we have yet to account for. This also connects to how we treat primitive cultures. Often, we underestimate their ingenuity, assuming that complex achievements must have come from outside influence. But sometimes the opposite might be true. What we call primitive may be the remnant of something once much more advanced, pared down by disaster, migration, or deliberate secrecy. In this sense, a small community using simple tools might still carry fragments of a once great knowledge tradition, like embers smoldering long after the fire has gone out. Another angle is how ideas leave fingerprints on materials. A distinctive style of masonry, a certain way of cutting stone, a particular alignment of monuments. These can all act like a cultural signature. If the same signature appears thousands of kilometers apart in the same period, it suggests connection, migration, or at least shared instruction. We see this with art motifs too. Spirals, zigzags, and interlocking patterns appear worldwide. Some are just human universals. Others are so precise and complex, they look like echoes of a specific tradition, traveling far from its point of origin. Another realm, where ancient influence may linger, is in the way humans organized their landscapes. City layouts, sacred alignments, and monumental earthworks can function as both practical and symbolic systems. Grid plans, drainage networks, and ceremonial axes all reveal deliberate choices. Choices that may carry knowledge about astronomy, resource management, or social control. When these patterns emerge fully formed, without transitional examples, it suggests that planners already had a mature blueprint, rather than experimenting step by step. Consider the similarities across distant sites. Mound complexes in the Americas echo the ceremonial platforms of Southeast Asia. Massive stone terraces in the Andes resemble retaining walls in the Mediterranean. Even at smaller scales, we find echoes. Identical proportions in temples, matching sightlines between monuments and solstice points, parallel engineering solutions to channel water or resist earthquakes. While some of this may be independent invention, the recurrence of complex and precise methods raises the possibility of inherited principles traveling across space and time. Ritual itself can be a transmission device. Festivals tied to lunar or solar cycles, pilgrimages along ancient pathways, and construction traditions passed from one generation of builders to the next can preserve data long after the original purpose is forgotten. An annual ceremony might encode an astronomical event. A temple's orientation might preserve a migration date or agricultural milestone. Over time, the meaning shifts, but the pattern remains. In this way, architecture and ritual form a double helix of memory, one physical, one cultural, spiraling through time. Even our modern infrastructures echo this. Roads built over older roads, cities layered atop previous settlements, sacred sites reused across religions. Each reuse hides and preserves simultaneously, erasing names while maintaining shapes. The result is a palimpsest of human experience, where the faint handwriting of an unknown civilization may still be legible beneath the script of later eras, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see it. Sometimes the faintest clues are not in grand monuments, but in the smallest surviving objects. A bead carved from a stone, found hundreds of kilometers from its source. A pigment requiring plants from a distant climate. A piece of textile woven with an unfamiliar technique. These modest artifacts can reveal trade networks, cultural exchanges, or knowledge transfers far older than written records. When such items appear in places where no known roots existed, they hint at connections we have yet to document. The same applies to technology embedded in everyday life. A farming method, a style of pottery, a way of aligning houses to catch sunlight. Each could be a remnant of a forgotten practice once widespread. Over generations, practical techniques survive long after their origins fade. A simple habit today might be the fossil of a complex system thousands of years old. By studying these habits across cultures, we can sometimes reconstruct the path of ideas, following them back through time, like tributaries, converging into a hidden source. Even music and storytelling may hold echoes of earlier worlds. Rhythm patterns, scales, and narrative structures can persist across migrations, carrying embedded memories of landscapes and experiences. A lullaby in one culture might share its melody with a ritual chant in another, halfway around the world. Though we often see these parallels as coincidences, they can also be traces of a long chain of transmission, connecting communities across oceans and millennia. To see the world this way requires patience. Instead of seeking one dramatic discovery, a lost city rising from the jungle, we look for constellations of evidence, subtle similarities, repeated motifs, and unexpected correspondences. Each alone is ambiguous. Together they begin to outline a network of human experience stretching beyond the borders of known history. In that outline, the possibility of a forgotten civilization becomes less a fantasy and more an open question, one that invites us to keep looking, listening, and comparing, because the next small find could illuminate the shadows where history has yet to be written. If we imagine the past as a layered landscape, each discovery is like peeling back one more stratum of earth. Beneath the topsoil of familiar history, the empires we name, the monuments we visit, may lie deeper sediments of forgotten lives, technologies, and ideas. This perspective turns every anomaly into a potential doorway. A stray bead carved from distant stone suggests a trade route no one suspected. A pattern of alignments across multiple sites hints at a shared system of measurement. A recurring symbol in myths, separated by oceans, points to a long-dispersed memory of a real event. Each clue on its own is small, but together they form an interlaced fabric that resists the neat boxes of our textbooks. Consider how a single innovation can ripple outward. A navigation trick learned from watching the stars spreads from one coast to another. Generations later, sailors using the method have no idea who invented it. A distinctive way of cutting stone travels with migrating builders, leaving behind a trail of nearly identical construction styles across continents. A medicinal plant carried by traders crosses mountain ranges, thriving in a new climate, and becomes embedded in local rituals far from its origin. In this way, a lost civilization need not be a massive empire to leave a global mark. It could be a network of small communities transmitting crucial ideas, slowly transforming the world without leaving a single capital city for us to find. This also reframes how we think about collapse. When a society disappears from the record, we imagine its people wiped out or assimilated. But knowledge can move even when populations scatter. Farmers fleeing a flood carry their seeds and planting calendars. Artisans displaced by war bring their tools and techniques. Navigators exiled from their homeland teach a new generation across the sea. Over time, the original context fades, but the knowledge persists, like a migrating bird, landing in new places, nesting there, and flying on again. If this happened repeatedly over thousands of years, it could produce the very puzzle we see today. Fragments of advanced skill appearing in unexpected times and places. Even the earth itself conspires to hide and reveal in cycles. Coastlines shift, rivers change course, forests grow and recede, deserts advance. Each shift buries one layer and exposes another. A thriving port can become a dry valley. A mountain settlement can be drowned under a rising lake. In some places, entire landscapes once hospitable to humans are now beneath hundreds of meters of water. When we drill cores or scan the seabed, we find traces of ancient shorelines and riverbeds where cities could once have stood. As technology improves, satellite imaging, LiDAR, underwater robotics, we're only beginning to glimpse these submerged worlds. The potential for revelation is enormous. Finally, this approach to history changes how we see ourselves. We're not the endpoint of a simple upward march, but participants in an ongoing conversation, stretching across tens of millennia. Every tool we use, every story we tell, every measurement we make could carry whispers from unknown teachers. This doesn't diminish the achievements of known civilizations. It expands them, situating them within a much larger, richer continuum. By embracing this wider view, we give ourselves permission to ask bigger questions and to see continuity where we once saw abrupt beginnings. We also cultivate humility, recognizing that our knowledge today may be just one more crest in a long tide of discovery and forgetting. If we approach the deep past with this widened lens, entire categories of evidence start to glow with new significance. Geological records, linguistic structures, ocean currents, even animal migration patterns can act as breadcrumbs pointing to human movement and settlement long before we have written proof. For example, the distribution of certain domesticated plants hints at trade routes or shared agricultural knowledge between regions once thought isolated. The presence of particular minerals or shell types far inland suggests sustained exchange networks. And climate data from ice cores or sediment layers shows when coastlines expanded or shrank, creating corridors or barriers for migration and commerce. The ocean floor itself may be the largest archive of our missing history. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose by more than 100 meters, drowning enormous stretches of habitable land. River valleys became bays, coastal plains became continental shelves. Archaeologists have already found submerged settlements off the coasts of India, Japan, Europe, and the Americas. Just small glimpses of what might still lie hidden. Think about how much of our modern civilization clings to coastlines today. If all our cities vanished beneath rising seas, future explorers might also assume humanity appeared suddenly inland, missing our drowned metropolises entirely. That same oversight could be shaping how we view the past. Language, too, carries the fingerprints of forgotten teachers. Words that appear as unexplained roots in multiple language families can hint at contact zones or source populations now gone. Syntax patterns, myth structures, and ritual formulae can persist across cultural boundaries, encoding migrations and exchanges far beyond documented history. Even scripts that have never been deciphered, from the Indus Valley seals to the Phaistos disc, might be fragments of a wider literate tradition we only partially glimpse. When we treat them as isolated mysteries, we miss the possibility they're part of a larger, lost network of communication. Material science offers another unexpected angle. When we analyze ancient pigments, alloys, or fibers with modern instruments, we sometimes find chemical recipes surprisingly sophisticated. Nanoparticles in Roman concrete, heat treatments in ancient iron, long-chain polymers in prehistoric glues, all testify to an experimental knowledge we're only now beginning to understand. If one society possessed and perfected these techniques and then disappeared or dispersed, later cultures could inherit only fragments. What we call traditional craft today could be the last surviving strand of an older, broader science. Finally, there's the psychological dimension of this search. Humans are pattern seekers. We connect dots, sometimes seeing constellations where there are only stars. Yet it's also true that real constellations exist, and without connecting the dots, we never see them. The challenge is to stay curious without becoming credulous, to hold possibilities open without rushing to conclusions. A lost civilization is not just an archaeological question, but a mirror we hold up to our own assumptions about progress, memory, and resilience. Each clue, from a single carved stone to a submerged city, invites us to expand our sense of time and complexity, to see ourselves not as the pinnacle of history, but as one chapter in a story still unfolding. When we step back far enough, we begin to see the planet itself as a palimpsest, layer upon layer of human and natural history, written, erased, and rewritten over tens of millennia. Every mountain pass, river delta, and coastal shelf may have served as a stage for countless forgotten dramas. Today we map political borders and national identities, but for most of our species' existence, movement and exchange ignored such lines. People carried seeds, tools, and stories along currents of migration, leaving subtle imprints in soils, genomes, and myths. Each imprint is like a note in a symphony, whose melody we're only beginning to recognize. Geology offers a time-lapse of these shifts. Sediment cores reveal abrupt climate changes, floods, and volcanic events capable of resetting entire civilizations. We see black layers of ash in archaeological digs corresponding to massive eruptions, followed by breaks in habitation or changes in material culture. Rising seas at the end of the Ice Age drowned landscapes larger than entire modern nations. Those drowned regions weren't empty. They were prime real estate for ancient peoples, with rivers, fertile plains, and coastlines ideal for settlement. To ignore them is to ignore the probable heartlands of early human development, now hidden beneath water. We also underestimate how sophisticated oral navigation and environmental reading can be. Pacific Islanders once crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean, using nothing but star paths, wave patterns, and bird flight. Arctic peoples read ice and wind as if they were maps. Aboriginal Australians encoded geographic information in songlines, musical maps of the land. If these skills existed tens of thousands of years ago in other parts of the world, they could have supported vast networks of interaction without leaving stone monuments. Such knowledge leaves faint traces, but its effects, shared crops, similar myths, aligned monuments, can persist long after the navigators themselves are gone. Art, too, can serve as a carrier wave for forgotten ideas. Spirals, fractals, and geometric lattices appear in ancient art across continents, sometimes matching mathematical principles we assumed were discovered much later. We find pigments blended with binders that resist fading for millennia, suggesting advanced chemical understanding. We see figurines or carvings depicting animals from distant lands, implying either travel or long-distance trade. Each piece of art is not only an expression, but a data point, revealing how people saw the world and where they had been. At the same time, we must recognize the biases in our own search. We privilege stone over wood, monumental over ephemeral, written over spoken. But a culture that excelled at lightweight, perishable technologies, textiles, biodegradable architecture, oral knowledge, could leave almost nothing behind, except indirect evidence. In such a scenario, our entire picture of progress becomes skewed toward what happened to survive, not what was actually most advanced. This realization urges humility. We may be comparing apples to fossils and calling the fossils primitive simply because they endured. Finally, embracing this possibility reshapes our understanding of ourselves. We become not just descendants of a few known civilizations, but heirs to a much broader human experiment, stretching across forgotten ages. Our calendars, our building traditions, our navigation methods, even our myths might be the residue of 1,000 unrecorded teachers. This doesn't diminish our current knowledge, it deepens it, situating us in a continuum far longer than the thin slice we've been taught. In doing so, we open the door to richer, more interconnected stories, ones that make room for both the grandeur of known history and the mystery of what still lies undiscovered. Imagine how differently we might see the past if every layer of Earth were transparent. We would watch migrations as glowing trails across continents, seaports and harbors flicker and fade with rising seas, and witness cities bloom, collapse, and bloom again in cycles of thousands of years. Instead, we glimpse only fragments: a chipped blade, a drowned wall, a myth about a vanished land. Yet even these fragments hint at an extraordinary continuity. They suggest that humanity has been sharing knowledge and reshaping landscapes far longer than our narrow timelines acknowledge. Modern science is slowly giving us new ways to read those hidden layers. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures without excavation. LiDAR strips away forest canopies to uncover ancient roads and terraces. Submersible drones scan the seafloor for traces of drowned settlements. Genetic studies map migrations invisible to archaeology, and high-resolution satellite imaging spots alignments and earthworks impossible to discern on foot. Each new tool pulls another thread from the tangle of deep history, showing that what we once considered isolated events may be chapters of a longer, interconnected story. We must also remember how much can be lost when a culture declines. Not only artifacts, but entire worldviews, scientific frameworks, and ecological knowledge can vanish. A people who understood the cycles of the sky, the healing properties of plants, or the principles of sustainable engineering might leave no obvious monuments, but could still have shaped the practices of countless successor cultures. Their absence from our history books does not erase their influence on our daily lives. When we trace our agricultural staples, our navigation methods, or even our calendar systems, we may be tracing lines of inheritance from teachers whose names are long forgotten. This perspective also reframes our future. Just as knowledge can be lost, it can be rediscovered. When we dig beneath a ruined city or decipher an old manuscript, we're not just learning about the past. We're reclaiming tools and ideas that may still be relevant. Roman concrete, once lost, is now inspiring sustainable building materials. Ancient agricultural terraces offer models for modern soil conservation. Navigational methods from indigenous peoples teach resilience in extreme conditions. The past is not just a museum, it's a library, and much of it remains unread. And perhaps the most humbling realization of all is that we ourselves are creating the next layer of this palimpsest. Our cities, our digital records, our engineered landscapes will one day be fragments for future explorers to interpret. If we misinterpret the traces of our ancestors, how much of our story will they misinterpret in turn? This awareness should inspire, not despair, but care. To preserve, to record, to remain curious about the full arc of human experience, rather than just the part we can see. Each of us, knowingly or not, is both archaeologist and ancestor, uncovering one layer while laying down another. If we allow ourselves to imagine the deep past as a continuum, rather than a series of isolated milestones, new questions come into focus. How many times might humanity have climbed high, only to fall and climb again? What kinds of knowledge could survive repeated cycles of catastrophe and renewal? And how might those survivors encode their wisdom so it would endure? In stone, in stories, in stars, or in the very patterns of how we build our lives? These questions are not idle speculation. They're invitations to look more carefully at what is already before us. Consider the long memory of landscapes. A mountain pass becomes a trade route for thousands of years, connecting cultures before they ever know each other's names. A river delta nurtures generation after generation of farmers, each inheriting irrigation patterns from the last. Over millennia, these places accumulate layers of use and meaning. Even when populations shift, the infrastructure endures. Footpaths become roads, campsites become towns, sacred groves become cathedrals. Each reuse preserves traces of an earlier story, like a ghost map beneath the modern grid. We can also look at astronomy as a time capsule. Alignments of monuments with solstices, equinoxes, and specific stars can be dated with precision. When we find such alignments that predate the known culture that built the structure, it suggests inherited knowledge or continuity across collapses. In some cases, star positions have shifted enough that the original alignment points to a date thousands of years before official history begins. This doesn't prove a lost civilization, but it does show that someone, somewhere, was observing carefully and passing that knowledge along for far longer than we've credited. The ocean, meanwhile, guards its secrets with extraordinary patience. Beneath hundreds of meters of water lie ancient river valleys, limestone caves with stalactites, and even preserved forests. We've barely started to explore these drowned worlds. Each discovery of a submerged village or road reminds us that the edges of our continents were once the center of human life. If a seafaring culture flourished along those coastlines before the floods, Its heartlands could now be deep under the sea, invisible except to sonar and remote vehicles. The sheer scale of the lost coastal shelves dwarfs the entire land area of some modern nations. Finally, this perspective on hidden histories is not about fantasy, but about possibility. It's about holding space for the unknown and letting evidence accumulate without prematurely closing the case. Each generation gains new tools, from radiocarbon dating to DNA analysis to satellite mapping, and each tool peels back another layer of the palimpsest. What seems impossible today may be obvious tomorrow. By cultivating patience and rigor, we prepare ourselves to recognize the next revelation, whether it's a submerged city, a deciphered script, or a genetic lineage that redraws the map of our origins. To truly grasp the scope of deep human time, we have to think beyond individual cultures and imagine humanity as a whole species moving across a living planet. We know from genetics and archaeology that our ancestors were migratory, adaptive, and ingenious. They crossed deserts, ice sheets, and oceans long before recorded history. Each migration acted like a thread, weaving distant regions into a hidden network of exchange. Where those threads knotted together, ideas sparked. Techniques for food storage, star navigation, stone carving, or ceremonial practice. Over time, those knots may have grown into centers of innovation, perhaps cities or regions of a forgotten civilization, whose echoes still vibrate in our present. This concept reframes even the simplest artifacts. A clay tablet with a curious symbol might be a fragment of a much larger record-keeping system. A peculiar mound on a floodplain might be the eroded tip of a monumental structure. A myth about a people from the sea might be an ancestral memory of maritime travelers carrying seeds and stories across the waves. In isolation, each of these is ambiguous, but taken together, they form a pattern of movement, connection, and forgotten mastery. Another layer of evidence lies in ecology. Domesticated plants and animals are living fossils of human influence. Their distribution can reveal ancient trade routes and contact zones, far older than written records. A grain species showing up thousands of kilometers from its wild ancestors' habitat implies not only travel, but cultivation, adaptation, and sharing of agricultural knowledge. Such exchanges could have been orchestrated by groups skilled in both seafaring and botany, moving staples of survival from one continent to another, long before our history books begin. We also have to consider the power of collective memory, encoded in ritual and place names. In many languages, rivers, mountains, and star clusters carry names that predate the current inhabitants. Those names can be the last surviving trace of an earlier culture's worldview, preserved not in monuments, but in speech. Similarly, pilgrimage routes or festival calendars may trace back to ancient cycles of movement, aligning human activity with the turning of the heavens. Over thousands of years, the original meaning fades, but the pattern persists, like a melody hummed long after its lyrics are forgotten. Even our present technological age offers parallels. Knowledge now moves instantly across the globe, divorced from its origin. In 1,000 years, historians might find our inventions scattered randomly and conclude they arose independently. This should humble us when we look backward. We, too, may be looking at scattered remnants of a once-connected world. Recognizing this possibility doesn't diminish the achievements of known civilizations. It enriches them, placing them within a grander human story, stretching across ages, catastrophes, and rebirths. In that story, we are not at the beginning or the end, but somewhere in the middle, explorers of our own forgotten past, piecing together a mosaic whose full image we have yet to see. Another perspective worth considering is how vulnerability and resilience interplay across deep time. Civilizations rise on fragile foundations: climate stability, resource abundance, social cohesion. And when any of these shift, even the most sophisticated societies can crumble. Yet people rarely vanish entirely. They migrate, adapt, and carry fragments of their culture with them. This diaspora of knowledge can seed new communities far away, creating a chain of influence invisible to archaeology, but detectable in traditions, genes, and landscapes. If we imagine this process repeated over tens of millennia, the result is not a straight line, but a vast mycelial network of human experience, branching and fusing across continents. One way to track this is by studying the diffusion of measurement systems. Across widely separated cultures, we find similar units of length, proportion, and geometry, often linked to astronomical or geophysical constants. These convergences might reflect independent discovery, but they could also hint at a shared inheritance from an earlier source. When we find temples, pyramids, or stone circles aligned to cardinal directions or specific celestial events with remarkable precision, it suggests either a parallel leap or a tradition passed from teacher to student across great distances. We can also learn from how knowledge is safeguarded in times of upheaval. Throughout history, sacred texts, oral epics, and encoded rituals have preserved information across dark ages and migrations. In some traditions, songs or dances encode complex navigational data or ecological knowledge, ensuring it survives even if written records are lost. If a pre-literate but advanced culture employed similar methods, it could transmit essential knowledge for thousands of years under the guise of myth or ceremony, outliving its own cities and governments. The physical environment conspires both to destroy and to preserve. Deserts can desiccate and mummify organic remains for millennia. Ice can entomb artifacts in near-perfect stasis. Peat bogs can hold wooden structures and even human bodies in eerie preservation. But the opposite is also true. Lush forests, heavy rainfall, and tectonic activity can obliterate all but the hardest stone in mere centuries. This selective preservation skews our sense of what was possible. A culture that mastered woodcraft, textiles, or composite materials more advanced than stone could vanish almost completely, leaving only indirect traces for us to puzzle over. Finally, looking at the interplay between myth, memory, and material evidence can transform our understanding. A legend of a star-fallen stone may point to a meteorite that became a sacred object. A tale of land bridges may encode real coastlines now underwater. Even cosmological stories can act as mnemonic devices for cycles of drought and flood. Taken together, these hints show that what we call primitive belief may sometimes be the fossil of an ancient science, one that organized experience into stories robust enough to survive millennia of retelling. When we look at human history as a long continuum rather than a ladder, the very idea of firsts becomes fluid. We label a certain monument, the first pyramid, a certain script, the earliest writing, a certain voyage, the first crossing. But in a deeper timescale, each first might be a rediscovery, a revival, or even an echo of something learned long before. Think of how often an invention is discovered, simultaneously, in different places today. A sign not of coincidence, but of converging knowledge and needs. In the same way, the appearance of similar architecture, myths, or technologies across widely separated regions could reflect shared ancestry rather than isolated innovation. This idea also reshapes our view of isolation. No landmass has ever been truly cut off from human movement for long. Even in prehistory, People crossed formidable barriers with ingenuity we underestimate. They followed coastlines, exploited seasonal ice bridges, and navigated by stars and currents. Over tens of millennia, such journeys accumulate. Even a trickle of contact, a few families, a handful of traders, a migrating craftsperson, can transmit ideas across thousands of kilometers, leaving subtle but indelible marks in the archaeological and genetic record. And just as ideas travel invisibly, so do fears and taboos. We find similar prohibitions and rituals across unrelated cultures, restrictions on building heights, sacred orientations, numbers associated with luck or danger. Some of these may reflect universal human psychology. Others could be inherited from a common source, repeated long after their original context was lost. Understanding which is part of the challenge and the thrill of reconstructing our deep past. We must also consider the role of catastrophe as both destroyer and teacher. Throughout the geological record, we see abrupt events, volcanic winters, sudden sea level rises, meteor impacts, capable of erasing entire coastlines or driving migrations across continents. Such disasters would have obliterated evidence while simultaneously spreading survivors and their knowledge far and wide. This dual effect could explain why some technologies appear abruptly in new regions. The original heartland destroyed, the practitioners scattered, carrying fragments of their tradition like seeds on the wind. Take, for example, the global flood myths. While details vary, the theme of a great inundation recurs worldwide. Geologists know that at the end of the last ice age, meltwater pulses flooded lowlands and reshaped shorelines everywhere. It's entirely plausible that coastal societies witnessed these floods firsthand and encoded them in stories. Thousands of years later, when the sea had stabilized and new peoples inhabited the land, those stories might persist as myths of sunken kingdoms and drowned worlds, a poetic memory of a very real catastrophe. Even surviving monuments may be reinterpreted after such upheavals. A temple built for one purpose might be adopted by a later culture for another. Alignments once tied to a living calendar might become merely decorative when their astronomical reference is forgotten. In this way, the material record preserves forms but loses meanings. The challenge for us is to read both the shapes and the absences, to see in each ruin not just a building, but a palimpsest of multiple civilizations layered atop one another. Another line of inquiry is the diffusion of sacred geometry and measurement. Across continents we find recurring ratios, 1-to-1 or whole number harmonics, encoded in temples, earthworks, and even musical scales. While some of this can be attributed to mathematical universals, the consistency of specific ratios and astronomical alignments across cultures separated by oceans raises the possibility of an inherited system of knowledge. These systems may have been transmitted not as abstract math, but as rituals, architectural rules of thumb, or cosmological teachings. We also find myths of culture heroes who arrive from afar to teach agriculture laws or astronomy, then vanish. In some traditions they're gods, in others wise strangers or shining beings. While these figures may be symbolic, they could also represent real seafarers or emissaries from more advanced communities. Oral tradition can store remarkable amounts of factual data in narrative form, especially when ritualized. Over millennia, details blur, but core structures remain, like a melody whose notes drift, but rhythm endures. In many places, archaeologists have found evidence of abrupt leaps in urban planning, metallurgy, or navigation without clear local precursors. Instead of assuming spontaneous invention, we might consider the possibility of knowledge transfer from a source now lost. Just as a single refugee scientist can transform a field today, a handful of skilled migrants thousands of years ago could have seeded techniques that blossomed far from their origin, leaving behind only faint genealogies of style, proportion, and myth. Finally, we must acknowledge how our own methods shape what we see. Archaeology, linguistics, and genetics are powerful, but also partial. They privilege certain kinds of evidence and overlook others. We look for stone because it survives, but not for woven reed because it decays. We map migrations through DNA, but cannot yet read the full complexity of cultural exchange. We decipher texts, but rarely reconstruct tone, gesture, or performance. This partiality means our picture of the past is like a photograph with most of the colors missing. Recognizing these limitations opens up room for humility and curiosity. Instead of dismissing anomalies as errors, we can hold them as clues. Instead of insisting on straight lines of progress, we can explore cycles and networks. Instead of seeing primitive and advanced as rigid categories, we can see them as shifting expressions of human adaptability. This shift doesn't romanticize the past. It respects it, treating our ancestors not as caricatures, but as equally intelligent humans operating under different constraints. In doing so, we also enrich our sense of the present. The technologies, rituals, and worldviews we hold today are not endpoints, but temporary constellations of knowledge. They may one day be forgotten or transformed, just as the achievements of earlier peoples were. But by studying their traces, we become better stewards of our own. We see how fragile and how durable human creativity can be, how easily lost, yet how stubbornly persistent. Each discovery is thus not only about them, but about us, our continuity, our fragility, and our capacity to leave messages for a future we cannot imagine. Across these chapters, we have journeyed through a tapestry of possibilities. Fragments of stone, echoes of myth, patterns in DNA, alignments in the stars, each suggesting that our human story is far older and richer than the thin slice recorded in our textbooks. We have imagined not one straight line of progress, but countless cycles of rise, dispersal, and rebirth, with knowledge traveling like migrating birds across oceans and eras. We've explored how myths can encode astronomy, how rituals can preserve calendars, how coastlines can swallow heartlands, and how even our languages and measurements may carry the fingerprints of long-forgotten teachers. Yet the most powerful discovery is not a lost city or an undeciphered script, but a change of perspective. To see ourselves not as the end point of history, but as participants in a vast continuum, a single generation in a long relay, gives both humility and hope. It reminds us that our tools, our stories, and our monuments are also messages for the future. What we preserve, what we pass on, and how we treat the knowledge entrusted to us will shape how the next explorers read our layer of the palimpsest. So as you sit now, wherever you are, imagine the same sky above ancient navigators, temple builders, storytellers, and children who once gazed upward with wonder. Their lives, though hidden, still ripple through yours. You are connected to them not only by ancestry, but by curiosity, by the same drive to look beyond the horizon and ask what came before. This continuity is the true mystery and the true inheritance. Thank you for traveling through this vast hidden terrain of human time. May these ideas kindle your own questions and invite you to see familiar things in new ways. In your city's layout, in a story you were told as a child, in a stone you pick up on a walk. Each may be a door to a deeper history. Welcome back at last to Journey Through Time, and thank you for exploring the unknown with us.